Hello friends, welcome to Dr. Rajesh Verma's YouTube channel. In this video, I'll be discussing with you the needs of counseling and in fact what counseling means. Counseling meaning to give professional help and advice to resolve personal or psychological problems. The individual who renders this advice and help has to be professionally sound, competent. This point makes the meaning of counseling clear. In general, the counseling has been misused in various fields. This is counseling we are talking about, a psychological help. This counseling helps clients understand and clarify the views of their life space and to learn to reach their self-determined goals through meaningful, well-informed choices and through resolution or problems of an emotional or interpersonal nature. The central idea of counseling is to strengthen the individual from inside so that he or she can resolve their own problems. They can meet the challenges thrown open by the life. The professionals only act as a guide. The professionals only act as a guide. The idea behind the counseling is to make the counselee self-sufficient to handle the problem. It's just not like popping pills. Counselor just prescribe the pill and the client pop up the pill and the problem is resolved. This is entirely different from this pop-up culture. Here the focus is not on the problem of the counselee but the inner core strength of the counselor. It's a voluntary face-to-face dialogue between a professional and a client. Why face-to-face? Because when the counselee narrates the personal feelings or the emotions or the ideas to the counselor has to be keen observer. The facial expression has to be observed by the counselor. Nowadays, during the pandemic situation, this face-to-face is shifted to virtual face-to-face, but still it is face-to-face. The client is offered an opportunity to explore self and discover ways and means of living with satisfaction. Here, there is nowhere mentioned that counselor provides the solution to the problem. Counselor only helps the counselee in exploring the self. Whose self? The counselee's own self. That they can discover themselves. That he or she can discover himself or herself and come up with the personal solutions. This will not only improve the self-esteem, self-efficacy, and it will significantly improve the satisfaction level of the counseling. It's a specialized service. It's a treatment. It's a therapy where a professional steps in to help the client, where the psychological problems are addressed. Why it is a specialized service? Because in counseling, counselor handles the most delicate and hidden part of individual's personality. That is the personal ideas, thinking, feelings, events. Remember, it has to be voluntary. Client cannot be forced to seek the counseling. Then he or she, himself or herself, has to be aware that they need counseling. That is the voluntary based. It cannot be forced upon the individual. Counseling has been defined in different ways, but I picked up these two. So counseling is a learning-oriented process completed in a simple social environment in which the counselor, professionally competent in relevant psychological skills and knowledge, assists the client in appropriate ways. Counseling is made to learn the permanent modification in behavior. The counselee is made to modify his behavior. Counselor never suggests or advise ways how the individual can modify the behavior. The counselor has to be professionally competent trained expert in psychological skills and the knowledge behind the counseling process so that counselor can assist the individual who is seeking the professional help. Carl Rogers, who proposed the client-centered therapy, suggests that it does not mean providing a service by means of which a specific problem of an individual may be solved. The idea behind this suggestion is that counseling process is not made for specific issues. Then the purpose of counseling is what? My dear viewers, purpose of counseling is to strengthening the individual so that the individual himself can deal with the life challenges and the problems. It's not the counselor that suggests the solution. The solutions has to come out from the client himself. The process should help the counselor in gaining clear insight into the problem and in achieving the self-confidence. The counseling process is the process where it helps the counselor in gaining the insight into the problems that individual is facing, which will help in improving the self-confidence level of the counselee. So with this definition, I want to suggest to my viewers that counseling is not just advice or suggestion. Counseling is a genuine process, an original approach where counselor ensures that individual is capable enough to solve his problem. At that point, we assume that counseling is success. There are three core prerequisites of counseling suggested by the Carl Rogers. Empathy, fitting into others' shoes. Empathy is entirely different from the sympathy. What is empathy? Empathy means understanding and experiencing the feelings, emotions, pain of the individual. It is the experience of understanding another person's thoughts, feelings, and condition from his or her point of view rather than from own. When we understand the feelings of others, this is sympathy. The moment we start experiencing the feelings and emotions of others, along with understanding that is empathy. So, counselor needs to have empathetic skill. Means that counselor has to have a skill generally known as the empathy, congruence. It means that counselor has to genuine and real in approach. What does it mean to be genuine and real? Genuine means understanding the viewpoint and experiencing also. Real approach means it has to be real not only in action but in the thoughts and cognitive domain too. Counselor cannot seems to act. It's a genuine process. So what is the congruence? Counselee feels secure to share her thoughts, personal feelings with the counselor. Not only secure, congruence helps in building a rapport with the counselee. The responsibility of building a rapport rests with the counselor. So what is rapport? Rapport is a kind of relationship between the counselee and the counselor. In this relationship, the counselee has full faith and trust in the counselor, where that is the personal thoughts, personal feelings will be kept secret with the counselor. That is a kind of relationship we call it a rapport. The counselor congruence and genuine approach allows the client to feel valued, which in turn builds self-esteem and trust in their own judgment. The counseling process has to build the self-esteem in the counselee. If this approach is achieved, then it can be said that it's a kind of a congruence that has been set up. Then the third, unconditional positive regard, means the counselor has to offer regard to the counselee. That regard has to be positive one. and unconditional one, irrespective of the style of speaking, style of dressing, style of sitting, socioeconomic status, and other factors. The counselor has to offer unconditional positive regard to the client. Carl Rogers said that it means caring for the client. The caring has to be genuine one, but not in a possessive way or in which a way, as simply to satisfy the therapist's own needs. Counselor has to act and behave from the viewpoint of the client, not from his own. As you see in other therapeutic techniques, the client is forced to accept the viewpoint of others, as in the allopathic medicine system. Whatever the physician prescribes, whatever the physician makes judgment, that's the final. That judgment has to be unconditionally accepted by the patient. But in psychology, in counseling, it's just opposite. Because we are dealing with a human being that have emotions, that have feelings, and that has faith in the counselor to share his personal issues. It means caring for the client as a separate person, because every individual is genius and unique his own way. That same principle is applied in the counseling. Every client is treated as a separate person. That is to be that with permission to have his own feelings, his own experiences, kind of a psychological freedom. Counselor has to offer such an environment where the counselor feels free to express or air his views and personal thoughts. If that environment is created, we can say that this is a kind of unconditional positive regard. Now there is a conditions that needs to be fulfilled prior to the counseling. Counseling is just not a simple process where it can happen anywhere. For that, there are certain conditions. There has to be some kind of a therapeutic environment. The counselor must be willing. This is a volunteer process, face-to-face process. Without the willingness or consent of the counseling process cannot move ahead. The counselor must be aware that he or she requires professional help. Till that time, the counselor feels the need of a psychological help, and that is to be professional help. The counseling process cannot be started. And that has to come from the counseling side. The counselor must have trust in the counseling technique and the counselor. This is the first point or first step of the counseling, where the counselor have kind of a faith and trust and belief in two things: the counseling as a therapeutic technique and the counselor as an expert one. Means the counselor with a professionalism, using the counseling as a scientific technique, can resolve the problems. This kind of a faith the counselor must have. The counselor should be adequately skilled, competent, professionally trained, and have experience, because individual shares the personal thoughts, individual shares the personal problems. For that, there are psychological skills that needs to be learned by the counselor. Counselor has to be expert, adequately skilled, and have experience in dealing with the problem. Rapport formation is a precondition for the counseling. Till that time rapport is formed, counseling process cannot be started. The moment rapport is formed, then only counselor will start sharing his events and personal thoughts and ideas. And the responsibility of making rapport rests with the counselor. There should be conducive environment for exchange of information between the counselor and counselee. The environment means physical environment and psychological environment. It has to be such where counselor feels safe and secure and counselor is free. They can freely exchange their views. Such an environment is a very important one. Mutual respect for personal come professional relationship. The relationship between counselor and counselee has two factors. This is a personal relation as well as the professional relation. Personal in the sense that both are in face-to-face situation where counselee is sharing the personal feelings, ideas and events with the counselor. And with full awareness that the counselor is not going to share this information with others. The second one is the professional one. Because the counselee is seeking the professional services and counselor is a professional competent enough to provide these services. So this is a two-way relationship, that is personal come professional. Now we will be discussing some characteristics of counseling. The process of counseling is related to two individuals. Minimum there should be have two individuals to start the counseling process and one of them should be counselor. That is to be professional. In client-centered therapy, the counselor is generally known as the client, not the patient or not the customer. In counseling, the counselor and the counselee have a face-to-face contact, be it on the physical field or the virtual one. Contact has to be face-to-face. Solution of the problems is arrived through mutual discussion. Counselor never offers solution to the problem. Then what is the need of counseling? Here the counselor tries, guide with his professional competency so that the counselee can become self-sufficient to handle the problems and life challenges. This is the objective of the counseling. The counselor, being a trained person, finds out what the problems and importance in his counselor's life through his skillful questioning. You know, there's a counseling interview. In that interview, the counselor has to be expert in asking skillful questions. Questions in such a way that are capable enough to extract the honest answer from the counselee. Simultaneously, not hurting the ego and self-esteem of the counselee. Questions should be designed and asked in such a way. And this can be only done when the counselor has been skillfully trained in the counseling process. Counseling is the active part of the entire process of guidance. Now here a word comes, the active part. Means counselor and the counselee both are active. It's not like one-way traffic where counselor is telling something, giving advice and talking about going on and counseling just sitting passive. No, this process has to be active one where both are the active participants. Counseling is a learning oriented process. Who learns here? Counselor or the counselee? Both. Here, counselor also learns and counselee also learns. But their learning is entirely different. Counselee learns to face the life challenges, where a counselor gains experience in dealing with various types of human problems, specifically psychological ones. So it's a learning oriented process. Counseling helps in solving individuals' behavioral problems in which emotions and motivations are the main factors. Our behavior is the manifestation of our emotional experience and how much we are motivated enough. So the behavioral problems which are the result of emotional and motivational factors are addressed in the counseling. Who addressed? Counselor. Right, you're right. Counseling helps individuals in overcoming or removing those inabilities and weaknesses which come in the way of learning process. When individual wants to learn, there are some psychological or physical impediments that inhibit the counselee in learning the new things. The psychological barriers are addressed in the counseling process. Counselor has to be skillful in identifying those psychological barriers that are preventing the counselee from learning and to how to handle the life challenges. Counseling is both an educational and a vocational service. What does it mean? It means that the process of counseling is done in both the setup, in professional setup as well as the educational setup. In educational setup, it is entirely focused on the students. In teachers also, parents also, but the main focal point is students. In the professional or vocational setup, the focus is on the employees, top manager also, middle level managers also, but the main focus is the employees. So it's a very important role in educational as well as the vocational services. Counseling is based on interview. In counseling interview, it is a primary process where information is extracted and gathered from the counselee regarding the problems, regarding the issues, regarding this behavioral part, emotional part, motivational part. These all things is gained, extracted from the counselee in the interview. In that interview I was talking about, the counselor has to be skillful in asking the pinpoint questions. The last characteristics in counseling, effort is made to provide an opportunity to the individual to understand and solve his own problems. That is the central idea of counseling. Counseling is strengthened from inside. Inside means psychologically, so that he can solve his problems in his own way. Because at every step of life, individual faces some challenges. And no one will find a counselor walking by a counselee at every point of time. In that case, the counselee has to be self-sufficient in handling the life challenges. And that is the only motto, objective of the counseling. Then why counseling? What is the need of the counseling? When an individual finds it difficult to address the problems. Problems can be personal problems, emotional problems, behavioral problems, the social problems that are emanating from the individual, personal problems. That time there's a need of counseling. When an individual is seeking professional scientific help in dealing with the life challenges, that time counseling requires. For identification and development of individual potential, sometimes we need external help to develop our own potential, to know our own potential, as in the case of Mahabharata, where Sri Krishna was able to counsel the Arjun. Similar case was in Ramayana, where Hanuman forgot about his own strength, potential. Then this whole lots of monkeys, different kind of people who are in that army, they made Hanuman aware of his potential. So that is the role of the counselor for adaptation and adjustment with change environment. When we migrate, when we change our institution, when we change our locality, all type of environment gets changed. Psychological environment, social environment, physical environment. For that reason, we need to adapt and adjust to the new environment. If there's a problem comes in adaptation and adjustment, there is requirement of counseling. Motivation for making the individual self-reliant. Here, the counseling requires. To gain insight through mutual learning. Mutual learning means learning from both the sides, counselor and a counselee. Counselor also gains insight and counselee also gains insight. But the insight is different for the counselor and the counselee. Optimal utilization of psychological resources. When we have strength, when we have capability, and we are not utilizing it optimally, then we need professional and scientific help in the form of counseling. For assisting the individual in need. Which type of need? I am not talking about the biological needs, in psychological needs. When individual feels that he needs some psychological help, psychological support, then he is free to move to the counselor. And here comes the role of the counselor. A diagnosis and analysis of personal problems. Sometimes we face psychological problems. and we find it difficult to diagnose what has happened to me. यार मुझे क्या हो गया है? We feel like that way. In that situation, we do not know where to go and what to do. Here comes the role of the counseling and helping the individual in self-acceptance. Counselors face this problem regularly. They face the clients who find it difficult to accept themselves. Sometimes we despise our face, sometimes we despise our handwriting, sometimes we despise our lifestyle. And this way we start despising our own self. The moment an individual starts despising the self, he feels enormous pain. And here comes the role of counselor and counseling. The individual has to be strengthened enough so that he can accept first himself. The individual once start accepting this self, then it becomes easier for dealing with the life challenges. Now, the last part. There is a very important segment in the society. We call it the students. Because students are the future of a nation. They have added responsibility. By virtue of students' nature and characteristics, they have their own special needs that are addressed by the counseling. So I'll be discussing few needs for the total development. Total means psychological development, personality development. Counseling requires. Because the students, by virtue of their age, have limited perspective. They do not have experience. They have energy, but they lack experience. For that, counseling is required. For vocational development, how they can improve their vocational abilities, counseling needs. Prepare to face life challenges. During student life, we generally receive everything from parents. We are fully fed by the parents. But when the students step in the real life, there he feels the heat of the competition. And that time, if requires, counseling can help out. Motivation for self-employment. Generally what happens, the student says a perspective. After completion of the studies, I'll be trying for this job. If the individual fails to find that job, in that situation, what to do? For that, the students has to be made aware that there is one more option, that is self-employment. This means the counselor has to motivate the students for the self-employment too. For judicious utilization of time. It's a common practice among students that they do not have experience. What they do, they generally waste their time. Where the elders, the counselors, they know the importance of the time. So that information is shared with the students. And this way, the counseling addresses this issue. Motivation to weaker section students. The students who are a little bit weaker in academics are motivated enough so that they can perform better. And this is done by the counselors. For prevention of wastage and stagnation. Wastage of what? Both physical as well as psychological resources. Stagnation means stopping at one point of time. That kind of a blocks. To avoid that blocks, the counseling is a very important phenomena that helps in providing help during turmoil and confusion. Students are in a growing age. They have a hormonal rush. They regularly found themselves in the turmoil and confusion. So to address these two issues, turmoil, confusion, additionally conflicts, counseling is the need. For addressing the gap between contemporary education and employment. Education is the feeding ground for the employment. The students who seek employment need to be educated. So there seems to be a gap between the education and employment by virtue of the changing and the dynamic nature of jobs. These jobs, by virtue of changing technology, keeps on changing. The market demands new skills. So there becomes a gap between the education and the market requirement. So that gap has to be addressed by the counseling. Students are not aware of that gap. So in brief, counseling is a process where individual is made self-sufficient and strengthened from the psychological side so that he can deal with the problems and meet the life challenges. And there are various needs why counseling is being done. And counseling is also done for the educational purpose and vocational purpose. Dear friends, these are my references. You can cross-check them, and to gain the deeper insight, you can go through them. Our next discussion will be principles of counseling. If you like this video, tell to others. If you have some issues, tell to me. You can just write in my comment box, or you can email me at vermasujit, VERMASUJIT @yahoo.com. Thank you friends for watching this video.